Michael Myers. Michael Myers has two completely different motivations depending on which quote-unquote Halloween sequel you take seriously, and the fight over which one is real has split fans for almost 30 years. John Carpenter and Deborah Hill created Michael for the original Halloween in 1978, and Carpenter's whole point was that the killer didn't have a reason. In the original, Michael isn't even credited by name. He's credited as The Shape. Then Halloween 5 and Halloween 6 came in and gave him one, the Cult of Thorn. A druidic cult places the runic Curse of Thorn on a chosen child, compelling that child to slaughter his entire family on Samhain, which is Halloween night, in exchange for sparing the tribe. The curse also hands the child supernatural strength and effective immortality, which is the in-story reason Michael keeps surviving bullets, falls, and decapitation attempts. Then, Halloween H20 in 1998 wiped that timeline out, and David Gordon Green's 2018 reboot trilogy threw it out again, framing Michael's evil as something closer to a transferable infection. The fan counter read is simple. The Cult of Thorn actually makes Michael less scary, because a motivated killer is always more comprehensible than a motiveless one. Which version is the real Michael is the longest-running argument in the franchise. Freddy Krueger. Wes Craven's first draft of A Nightmare on Elm Street made Freddy Krueger a child molester, and the only reason he ended up as a child murderer instead was a Hollywood news cycle. The film came out in November 1984. The in-film canon is clean. Freddy was a child murderer in the fictional town of Springwood, Ohio, released on a technicality after a botched arrest. The parents on Elm Street tracked him to a boiler room and burned him alive. After death, Freddy comes back as a malevolent spirit who attacks the children of his killers in their dreams, and any wound he inflicts there crosses over to the real world. He became a child murderer rather than a child molester because the studio changed it during script development to avoid being accused of exploiting a wave of highly publicized child molestation cases in California at the time. The dream death idea came from a real Los Angeles Times article series in the 1970s about a Cambodian refugee family. The young son had survived the killing fields, and once safe in the United States, he started having terrifying, recurring nightmares. He refused to sleep for days. When he finally did, his parents heard him screaming, and by the time they got to him, he was dead. Craven built the dream feeding mechanic directly out of that story. The 2010 remake reintroduced the original molester reading more explicitly, and fans rejected it for the same reason they rejected the Cult of Thorn. It traded ambiguity for shock. The fan counter-read is that Freddy's real motivation was never revenge at all. It's that he feeds on fear itself. Jason Voorhees. A Friday the 13th director admitted on the record that Jason Voorhees was secretly resurrected using the Necronomicon from Evil Dead, and the studio never acknowledged it either way. Jason debuts as the killer in Friday the 13th Part 2 in 1981. The franchise's canon motivation is vengeance, first for his own near drowning as a bullied child at Camp Crystal Lake in 1957, and then for his mother's decapitation at the end of the first film. The canon resurrection moment comes in Part 6, subtitled Jason Lives, in 1986. Tommy Jarvis stabs Jason's exhumed corpse with a metal fence post during a thunderstorm. Lightning strikes the post, and Jason reanimates as an effectively undead killer who keeps all his memories. Director Adam Marcus, who made Jason Goes to Hell in 1993, has stated his personal canon was different. He believes Pamela Voorhees actually brought Jason back by reading from the Necronomicon, the demonic book from The Evil Dead, which makes Jason a deadite. The studio has never officially confirmed or denied Marcus's read. The wider fan counter-read is even cleaner. Jason isn't one resurrected man at all. He's a Crystal Lake-bound revenant tied to the land itself, which is why the lake keeps producing him no matter how many times he gets killed. Ghostface. Ghostface is the rare slasher whose motivation actually got revealed on screen, and it's somehow the pettiest reason in the entire genre. The original Ghostface killers in Scream from 1996 are Billy Loomis, played by Skeet Ulrich, and Stu Macher, played by Matthew Lillard. Billy's stated motivation comes out in the third act unmasking. He took revenge against Sidney Prescott's mother, Maureen Prescott, for having an affair with his father, an affair Billy blamed for his own mother walking out of the family. A year before the film starts, Billy murders Maureen and frames her other lover, Cotton Weary, who gets convicted and serves time for a murder he didn't commit. Stu's motivation is even smaller. He goes along with Billy for the thrill. Stu literally says, "Peer pressure. I'm far too sensitive." Wes Craven's script is doing this deliberately. He took the slasher convention of a mythical, unknowable killer and answered, "What does the killer want?" with the most mundane high school reason possible. Each sequel reuses the Ghostface mask with a new killer pair and a new motivation, because the mask is a vessel, not a person. By the way, if you're enjoying this so far, I post videos like this regularly. Subscribing would really help out. Thanks. Art the Clown. Art the Clown is the only major modern slasher whose director openly tells fans the killer isn't entirely human, and the second film basically confirms it. Damien Leone created Art and debuted him in short films starting in 2008, before headlining the features Terrifier in 2016, Terrifier 2 in 2022, and Terrifier 3 in 2024. Across all three features, Art is played by David Howard Thornton. The canon motivation, as presented through Terrifier 3, is that Art appears to be a vessel for collecting souls for Satan. The mythology frames him as a demonic entity guided by a companion known as the Little Pale Girl. She resurrects Art at the end of the first feature, and she functions as his handler, a direct line to a higher demonic authority. Leone himself has said in interviews that Art was always intended as a demonic representation, and his exact phrase is, perhaps even Satan itself. The widely cited fan counter-read is that Art was originally a fully human serial killer who, upon being killed, was selected by the demonic hierarchy as a vessel because of how completely depraved he already was. So the killings aren't revenge or compulsion, they're recruitment. Either way, this puts Art at the opposite end of the slasher motivation spectrum. Ghostface kills for personal grievance. Jigsaw kills for philosophy. Art kills as a job assignment. The franchise has confirmed Terrifier 4 will officially reveal his pre-demon backstory. He isn't avenging a wrong, he isn't driven by trauma, and he isn't testing anyone, he's harvesting. Pamela Voorhees. Before Jason was the killer, his mother was, and her motivation is the only one in the slasher genre that actually makes some moral sense. Pamela Voorhees is the original killer of Friday the 13th from 1980, played by Betsy Palmer. Jason doesn't appear as a killer in the first film at all. Her canon motivation is direct. Her son Jason drowned at Camp Crystal Lake in 1957 while teen counselors were having sex in a cabin instead of watching the swim area. Pamela killed the counselors who were there that night, and every counselor who came back to reopen the camp afterward. She also believes she's hearing Jason's voice telling her to do it. "Kill her, mommy, kill her," framed by the script as a maternal psychotic break, not as supernatural possession. She gets decapitated by the final survivor, Alice Hardy. Of every motivation in this video, Pamela's is the only one a real jury might reduce to manslaughter. Pinhead. Pinhead used to be a British Army captain who survived one of the worst battles of World War I, and that detail explains the entire Hellraiser franchise. Pinhead, the lead Cenobite, was created by Clive Barker for Hellraiser in 1987. Originally human, Pinhead was Captain Elliot Spencer, a British Expeditionary Force officer who fought at the Battle of Passchendaele in 1917, one of the deadliest engagements of the entire war. Surviving Passchendaele left Spencer with profound trauma, survivor guilt, and a complete loss of faith in humanity and God. He spent the years after chasing increasingly extreme forms of sensory experience, and in 1921, in British India, he found the Lament configuration, the puzzle box that summons the Cenobites. He solved it, they pulled him through, and eventually he joined their ranks as their lead. Pinhead's stated philosophy is striking. He doesn't operate on sadism. He operates on obligation, bound by Hell's code, which says he doesn't torture anyone who hasn't actively sought out the puzzle box. He's a judge of sin, not an indiscriminate killer. He's played by Doug Bradley across the original franchise. The World War I soldier origin reframes the whole franchise as a story about trauma, turning a man into an instrument of judgment. Chucky. Chucky is the only slasher in this video whose motivation is, "I am literally trying to leave my own body." He debuts in Child's Play in 1988, created by Don Mancini, and the doll houses the soul of serial killer Charles Lee Ray. On November 9, 1988, Charles Lee Ray gets mortally wounded by Chicago detective Mike Norris during a chase. Bleeding out in a toy store, Ray uses a voodoo amulet called the Heart of Damballa to transfer his soul into a good guy doll. Damballa, in Haitian voodoo, is the Sky Father, the primordial creator spirit, and in the film's mythology, the amulet can transfer a living soul into a new vessel. The catch is that the spell is flawed. The longer Chucky stays in the doll, the more human he becomes, and if he stays too long, he's stuck there permanently. His entire motivation across the original trilogy is finding a way out, and specifically, into the body of the boy who first owned him, Andy Barclay. Jigsaw. Jigsaw is the only slasher in this video who insists he isn't a killer, and he means it. John Kramer, the Jigsaw killer, debuts in Saw in 2004, played by Tobin Bell. The film was directed by James Wan, shot in 18 days for roughly $1.2 million. The canon motivation is that Kramer is a civil engineer with terminal cancer, an inoperable frontal lobe tumor that developed from colon cancer. The turning point comes in a flashback revealed across the first two films. Kramer attempts to take his own life by driving his car off a cliff. He survives, crawls out of the wreck, and the pain of being alive convinces him that life is worth fighting for. From that moment on, he designs lethal tests, traps that force ungrateful or self-destructive people to commit acts of self-harm to escape. In his framing, the survivors are reborn with appreciation for life. The people who die were never going to value it anyway. Kramer never pulls a trigger himself in canon, which is why he tells himself he isn't technically a murderer. The fan counter-read is that he's a textbook narcissist whose tests are elaborate self-justifying theater. The terminal cancer epiphany is real. The conclusion he drew from it was a rationalization. What makes him terrifying is that he isn't lying to his victims. He's lying to himself. Norman Bates. Norman Bates is the original blueprint for every slasher killer in this video, and his motivation is one sentence: he's jealous of his own mother. Norman debuts in Psycho, both the 1959 Robert Bloch novel and Alfred Hitchcock's 1960 film, played in the original by Anthony Perkins. The canon motivation gets laid out in the closing psychiatrist scene. Norman murdered his mother Norma and her lover with strychnine, then kept her corpse and adopted her personality as a second self. When Norman feels sexual attraction to a woman, the mother personality takes over and kills the object of his attraction out of jealousy. Marion Crane gets killed because Norman is attracted to her. The film's final shot, Norman in his cell, the mother voiceover saying, "I wouldn't even harm a fly," is the moment Norman has been fully replaced. Psycho invented the genre, and every slasher backstory that follows owes something to Hitchcock framing the killer's motive as a buried psychological wound. Candyman. Candyman is the rare slasher whose motivation is documented historical injustice, and saying his name in a mirror is what summons him, because being remembered is the only revenge he has left. Candyman, real name Daniel Robitaille, debuts in Bernard Rose's Candyman in 1992, based on the Clive Barker short story The Forbidden. Tony Todd plays the role. Robitaille was born in the late 1800s in New Orleans, to a formerly enslaved father who became wealthy after the Civil War. Robitaille was educated in white schools and trained as a portrait painter. In his mid-20s, a wealthy white landowner commissioned him to paint his daughter Caroline. They fell in love, and Caroline became pregnant. When the affair was discovered, a mob hired by Caroline's father caught Robitaille, sawed off his right hand with a rusty saw, smeared him with honey stolen from local beehives, and let the bees sting him to death while chanting Candyman. After death, Robitaille returns as a vengeful spirit summoned by chanting his name 5 times into a mirror. The summoning ritual is the point. He becomes real only when he's named. The fan counter-read is that he isn't really seeking revenge on the descendants of his killers at all. He's enforcing his own memory. The killings are how he ensures that Candyman is still spoken. Most slashers come to you. Candyman has to be invited. Leatherface. Leatherface is the only slasher in this video whose motivation is essentially, the economy did this. He debuts in Tobe Hooper's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre in 1974, played by Gunnar Hansen. The setup is that Leatherface is the youngest of a rural Texas family, whose male members had all worked at the local slaughterhouse. When the slaughterhouse mechanized in the early 1970s, the family lost their livelihood. The film frames the turn to cannibalism as displacement. They were trained as slaughterhouse workers. The slaughterhouse no longer needed them, and they applied the only skill they had to the only available raw material. His human skin masks are presented as identity protection, rather than malice. The economic subtext, disenfranchised workers turned violent by mechanization, is now the standard critical consensus on the film. Jill Roberts. Of every killer in this video, the one whose motivation is the most modern, the most cynical, and the most prophetic is a teenage girl who wanted to be Instagram famous before Instagram existed. Jill Roberts is the killer reveal of Scream 4 from 2011, played by Emma Roberts. The canon motivation gets delivered in the film's third act unmasking. Jill is Sidney Prescott's cousin. Her stated goal is to murder Sidney, frame an innocent boyfriend, survive as the lone final girl, and ride the resulting media wave into permanent celebrity. Her central monologue line, "I don't need friends, I need fans," became one of the most quoted slasher lines of the 2010s, precisely because it stated out loud what the genre had been implying for years, that violence had become a path to fame. Wes Craven and Kevin Williamson wrote Jill 3 years before the term influencer hit mainstream use. The film essentially predicted the attention economy as a serial killer motivation. Jill's reveal mirrors Roman Bridger's reveal in Scream 3. Roman, Sidney's secret half-brother, killed because he resented Sidney being chosen by their mother and inheriting fame. Jill kills for the inverse reason. She wants the fame Sidney accidentally earned. The fan counter-read is that the "I need fans" speech isn't just the character's psychology. It's Craven himself diagnosing the next 10 years of media culture. Critics have argued in retrospect that Scream 4 is the most prescient slasher film of the 21st century. Jill is the killer the genre had been working toward for 30 years and didn't realize. She isn't a cult. She isn't a curse. She isn't a ghost. She's a teenager who watched the world reward Sidney for surviving and decided survival was a career path. And she's the most quotable killer on this list, which is, fittingly, exactly what she wanted. If you liked what you saw, think about subscribing to stay updated with every upload. Thanks for watching.